Hello, good afternoon to everybody out there. I'm Craig Crowley. I'm the CEO of Action Deafness. Action Deafness and Deaf Hearing Trailblazers are co-producing this UK Deaf Leadership Summit webinar series. This is the first webinar of 2025, and being as it's 2025, it does mean we are 5 years old now, as we started in 2020. We were starting with a conference. Then unfortunately that was unable to take place because of COVID, the month of March 2020. So we've been running webinars ever since, very successfully, and we've had some amazing leaders that have joined us. So we're still going strong, which is fantastic. This is the first of the year, and we have our guest James Watson O'Neill. He is, I'm really excited to interview him. He has plenty to share with you, stories about his experience. James is one in a series of guests we have. They are all an hour long, so we'll finish exactly on 2 o'clock. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function if you can, and then hopefully we'll have time and an opportunity to ask those questions to James. Okay, so James has had a long career working in deaf and disability organisations, so Sign Health, NSPCC, Scope, a variety of organisations. And I'm not going to give away his background and experience. We'll wait to ask him. So if I welcome James to the summit now. Hi, it's good to have you with us, James.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me, Craig.
Brilliant. Really excited to have this conversation with you, James. So it's great we've got this opportunity, and you're working for Sense at the moment. Previously, you were CEO of Sign Health. And I'm sure you've got plenty of stories to share with us. So my first question to you, James, if you don't mind, is could you tell us about your early life? What was it like for you in your early life? I'm aware you grew up in a military family. So can you tell us any more about that, please?
Sure. Well, first, thanks so much for having me. I feel very proud and privileged to be here with you today. My parents will probably be quite pleased to see me in a suit. I'm not often in a suit. As we talked about, I'm going off to lots of other meetings today that mean I have to wear a suit. But yeah, so my parents were in the army, as you say, and that means I got to move around the world a lot when I was a kid. So they lived in Hong Kong, lived in Germany, in the US. And so I would travel from school here to visit them in school holidays, and just meant I got to see a lot of the world, which I was, I think, very privileged by, actually. And when my parents moved somewhere new, they would find a church because they're quite religious people, but they would also find a volunteering opportunity. They didn't call it that, maybe, but we did some amazing volunteering with lots of different charities all over the world when I was a kid. So yeah, I learned a lot from them. I have a lovely brother too, Tom, who's 4 years older than me, and we were sort of just a merry band of four as a family growing up, moving to all these different countries. Yeah, I had a great childhood. I was very lucky.
I can imagine. So you've grown up in a close family, especially close with your brother. Who were your early role models growing up? Who did you look up to?
Well, I grew up as a gay man, so I really admired a lot of gay leaders. Um, People like Harvey Milk, the American politician who was very sadly assassinated. But it's a wonderful story. If you're not familiar with that story, please do have a look at that. There's a man called Larry Kramer, who sadly died a few years ago, but he's a very important man in terms of the AIDS crisis and the work he did in theatre. So I was very influenced, I think, by people who did a lot around social change and who were interested in, yeah, changing the world and helping people see difference, I suppose.
It's interesting you mentioned Harvey Milk. Um, I saw the film many years ago with Sean Penn, a Hollywood movie. But one thing I spotted where they're talking about, well, there's two things actually. I'm sure they were an influence for you. One was about inclusion and also broadening equality. You know, equality at any cost, and that was a brave statement to make back then. But really, he was a change maker himself. So I think that I can see the influence in you. I can imagine greatly.
Yes, and the film is really worth watching. The man who wrote the film, a man called Dustin Lance Black, he won an Oscar for the film. And in his Oscar speech, which was at the time of the equal marriage debate in America, he talked very passionately about equal marriage. And he's a great example of somebody who grew up Mormon and did a lot in the equal marriage work to lean back into the church that he grew up in and try and understand their perspective about social change, their fear around equal marriage. So rather than kind of shouting at them, he worked with them to come on a journey around equal marriage. So he's a man I admire a great deal. He's married to Tom Daly, and I think I'm sure I will never meet them in real life. But if I did, I think I would refer to Tom Daly as the husband of Dustin rather than the other way around.
The Olympian, of course, the Olympian diver. Um, I didn't realise it's Dustin that wrote in. So if we talk to Hollywood, because there's a slight link to acting there, if you bear with me. I was trying to pick up on your early career, and you thought about and wanted a career. I know you mentioned to me a while ago that you were considering becoming an actor. Um, can you tell us a little bit more, or tell the audience a little bit more about what made you change your career director if you were thinking of acting and had aspirations?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I always wanted to be an actor. I went to drama school at the same time as I did my degree, and I had a lovely time. I love theatre particularly. I just wasn't very successful at being an actor, sadly. But I think I love lots of creative things. Some of my friends who are actors, I think they're actors because they're only interested in being an actor. And I'm interested in lots of different creative things. And yeah, I was lucky. I got distracted into a different kind of career. I worked in a kind of advertising and PR and marketing and lots of other different jobs before I joined the charity sector in 2001. So yeah, it took me a while to get here into the charity sector, but I'm glad I got here eventually.
Of course. I mean, you've tried, tested, experimented, and along your career path. So, you know, acting, drama, you've got that experience, which must have been useful. You've also worked within different organizations, you know, if you explained through the PR part of your journey, but what motivated you? What kind of challenges did you come across as you've moved into these different jobs? I know you've talked about starting your career in NSPCC, then Scope. What motivated you throughout your career?
I think that's one of the reasons I joined the charity sector is about motivation. I spent time in other jobs struggling with the idea of why am I doing this job? And I think maybe because I was a disappointed actor, really. But when I found work in the charity sector, I really felt like I found my motivation. So I remember my first day at the NSPCC in the East End of London, and the group of women who I got to work with, who sort of, I don't know, I feel like they kind of picked me up, shook me, and put me back down. They really helped me become myself, and taught me a lot. And I think they were a really important part of me being motivated into the next part of my career. And it's amazing what impact you have on people. I think they were just doing their jobs. They weren't that interested in me particularly, but they had a really big impact on me. So I'm forever grateful to those amazing women I work with.
That's interesting because obviously you had influences and were impacted, and those experiences enabled you to move on in your career, but still within the charitable sector. Have you thought about, careers in corporate, public, private sectors? Have you ever considered that?
I have actually. I thought about it. In the last kind of 10 years, I thought about it, and I've actually spoken to some people who left the charity sector to work in the corporate sector. I was particularly interested in it in terms of whether one might have a bigger impact. If you work in, for example, EDI for a global bank or something like that, do you have a bigger impact on more people? Do you make bigger change? Um, Most of the people I spoke to who did those kinds of roles said that they really struggled and found it very difficult to have the kind of influence that we might want to have. But yeah, I think the charity sector is great, but there are lots of other people doing lots of other types of jobs, aren't there? And we can sometimes forget that in the charity sector. So it's good to have your eyes open to other things, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I have to mention that you are a fellow um, of the Society of Leadership, SLF, and also part of the Society of Arts, uh, FRA. Yeah, because obviously, you are keeping your eyes open for possibilities, opportunities, and any interests in whatever you do with your career. So I think it's all part of your journey, isn't it? Your leadership journey.
Yes, and I think I've been lucky to be a trustee in my career too, in lots of different charities. One of my very early trustee roles was at the amazing charity Deaf Plus, which of course Reg is now the chief exec of and doing a great job there. I was a trustee there partly because I lived in Whitechapel, very close to Deaf Plus's head office. But I learned a lot from being a trustee. And I'm a trustee now of NCVO, the kind of charity sector umbrella body. And I really encourage people to become trustees because I think it's a really important way of kind of broadening your experience. But you don't have to change job to do that. You can be a trustee in lots of different charities too. So yeah, I've learned a lot. I have been a trustee with you too, Crowley. You were a chair of charity that we were both on the board of. And I learned a lot from you as a leader as well. I watched you lead the charity through some really interesting times, and I learned a lot from you. I feel very lucky that I've got to sit in different rooms with different people and learn. Yeah.
I think that's one of the important hallmarks of leadership is that you're learning and we're learning from each other. And the learning goes both ways. We've both been trustees of the UK Council on Deafness, UK COD, and we've learned from each other during that experience. And I think that's really important skill to be able to learn and to share and to cooperate, on issues you agree or disagree, but it's having that respect for each other. So you're absolutely right. We're learning from each other. If I talk to you about governance and being a trustee later, I've got a question in mind to ask you about that. But if I now go on to your work and your career, so you joined Sign Health 8 years ago, is that right? So 9 years ago, actually, you've corrected me. So you joined, And then 4 years later, we were hit by the pandemic. So I just wanted to ask you a real direct question. So you had 4 years of going through changes within Sign Health to how Sign Health is now, but COVID was real testing times for you as a leader, I can imagine. So how did you manage to turn things around and develop during the pandemic period? Can you share a bit with us about your leadership journey on that basis?
Sure, yeah. Um, it's always something I feel very emotional about, partly because COVID, I think, was a big thing for everybody, but it was a very difficult time for Sign Health, I think, because Sign Health, as you know, is a health charity for deaf people, and it was a health pandemic. So it was a time where I think we all felt we had to step up in order to respond for deaf people. And I'm so proud of what the charity achieved during that time. One of the things that we did was offer online interpreting through a service that was called BSL Health Access, which some colleagues will remember. And I'm super proud of what we achieved and the way that the board of trustees supported us, the way that colleagues worked so hard. Rebecca, who now leads the British Deaf Association so well, she was a big part of establishing the branding, choosing the name of that service, making sure that it, got out there to thousands and thousands of deaf people. So I'll always be really proud of what we did, but it was very much a group effort. Yeah, I think what was interesting, I suppose, looking back now, is that Sign Health really chose to raise its profile at that time. And I think we were, me, Rebecca, other colleagues working together at the time, Christopher Reed was there too. We were just trying to make good decisions, we're just trying to think about what the best thing for deaf people might be. And we were shocked, I think we were all shocked about how often we weren't included in conversations. The clearest example of that, of course, was there not being an interpreter at the government briefings. And I think Lynn's amazing campaign, whereas the interpreter campaign, is another really strong memory for me of COVID, because she worked so hard to raise the profile so successfully of such a visible inequality. And despite lots of things that we achieved, I also think that there are some really tough lessons for the government and everybody to learn from that. And you'd hope, wouldn't you, that if it were to happen again, things would be different. Yeah, I'm determined that we keep trying to make sure that happens. But yeah, it was a very tough time. But I'm really proud of what Sign Health did and what it became as a result of COVID. Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And I agree, it was a very testing time then. And that COVID still affects many people, because they've had to face a lack of access, especially deaf people. So you talked about your approach. You kind of brought people together to create something that made the access to deaf people wider. You've got BSL Health Access, which was an amazing invention, and it was so urgently needed back then. It was incredible and a brilliant project. And yes, of course, the government unfortunately didn't carry it on. So picking up your point, obviously you have a leadership style. You mentioned Rebecca, you mentioned Chris, you've mentioned Reg. That's the humility of you, because you mention others in your journey. So you're recognizing their credentials too. And I think that's important, but you have your own leadership approach, because we're all deaf leaders, but what do you think other people see in you? It's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm not actually sure. I think I learned a lot from my parents, but who I said both were in the military, right? So their approach to leadership was very much part of the way it's very much part of our family life. The kind of expectation that you would put yourself last, that you would have a bigger picture view of what everybody's experiencing. I remember really clearly we lived in Hong Kong in the late 80s, and this is a family story. So whether it's really true or not, I don't know, but it's the family story. My dad was responsible for transport in the army. So he was, I think, at that time, commander of transport for Hong Kong. And in another part of the world, another part of the army was moving a lot of stuff to support a lot of soldiers. And it was my dad who thought about tampons. Has anyone actually thought to send any tampons to that part of wherever the world or wherever it was happening? And I think the answer was no, and therefore some got sent. But I suppose what I learned from him and my mum, is a sense of like having a kind of bigger view. Like, don't just think about yourself, think about everybody else, maybe. You know, I've been really lucky to work with really amazing people, and sometimes you don't know that at the time. You know it better looking back. And so, yeah, I think I've been very lucky that the people I've been surrounded by, and people who've been ready to stop me and go, I don't think that's a good idea. Don't do that. I think I'm trying always to be ready to listen. And in a crisis like COVID, that can be quite tricky. But we found ways to work together at that time that I think helped us stop each other a little bit and check each other. And I try and use in our world, in the charity sector, I try and work with the board in that way. So the BSL Health Access example, we did the formal work as well. So I remember Rebecca and I, and with the help of another colleague, our finance director, Mahua, at the time, we wrote board papers, and we got the board to approve it formally and properly, and we did the governance of it really well. And I think that's really important. So we didn't make decisions on the hoof on our own. We did it properly and asked lots of people to challenge us.
Collective effort. Yeah, a collective decision based on strong leadership. Yeah, in any of those avenues, obviously collectively you're stronger. Again, I'm hanging on to my question later, but about teamwork and leadership. I want to ask about you and to talk about you as a person. So you've had this experience on a personal level and your leadership journey. You've lost your hearing early in your 20s, I believe. Do you consider yourself a deaf person, a disabled person, or what would you call yourself?
Yeah, such a great question, Craig. Well, first of all, I would say that I've gained my deafness, not lost my hearing. My privilege of being at Sign Health for 8 years helped me, I mean, to an extraordinary degree, to try and establish my own identity as a deaf person. I would definitely identify as a deaf person and as a disabled person, because I believe in the social model of disability, and that as deaf people, we are disabled by a society that doesn't remember that there are deaf people around. So yeah, but I have a lot of people to thank for that too, right? Because I sit around a kitchen table at lunchtime in Sign Health, back when Sign Health had an office, and get challenged by people like Abigail Gorman and Rebecca and lots of colleagues who would help me explore all those things. Yeah, but it's an ongoing journey, right? Because there's an intersection of my leadership principles, if we can call them that, about sort of putting yourself last and thinking of everybody else first. That doesn't work very well when it comes to access. You know, if I arrive in a meeting and only think about my access needs when the meeting's starting, then I'm putting myself at quite a big disadvantage. So I'm trying to learn to put myself first in some ways, particularly when it comes to access. But I find that difficult. It's not a natural feeling for me. And of course, when I worked with lots and lots of deaf people at Sign Health, it was very different. Now that I work at Sense, where I work with a lot more hearing people, it's just different. It's not good or bad. It's just different, and so I have to respond for different. And I don't think I think I'm learning that, but I'm only in my 8th week at Sense, so I've still got a bit of a journey to go on.
Of course, you're right. It is a huge change of cultures from one organization to another. Um, yeah, but as you said earlier, you're learning. You're learning as you go from other people. So you are learning from the people within your new organization now. It's interesting, your leadership style, is thinking of others before yourself. That is your leadership identity. And also you've talked about your deaf identity and you've learned a lot. And I've seen you change your identity from kind of 9 years ago to where you are now. You are a different person. You've kind of found your identity. And that is remarkable over that period of time. So I just want to say you have changed, much more positive. You use deaf gain. It is a positive part of your identity now. And that's been interesting to see. And I'm sure your colleagues can see that for themselves. It's fantastic. Right. Now, if we go back to a question I mentioned earlier about volunteering and being a trustee. You've mentioned more than once during this conversation about volunteering. So you've been a trustee and that's helped you understand what it is and achieve what you've done as a CEO now. So you've talked about Deaf Plus and starting there, and that's really interesting to see. Could you tell me a little bit more about the initiative you had when you were at Sign Health? I've been the Shadow Trustee Scheme. I found that really interesting. So if you can talk about that and what that led on to in a different model, could you talk about that, please?
Sure, absolutely. Well, if I just describe the model first of all, so this was just before COVID, I think, probably 2019. Then we came up with this idea. We were struck by the fact that we would always need trustees at Sign Health, and that we might find that difficult, so that we should probably take some responsibility for building a pipeline of people who felt confident to apply to be trustees. So we set up something called the Shadow Trustee Scheme, and we initially designed it for, we were looking for 5 or 6 young deaf people, particularly young deaf people from the global majority. It was very important to try and redress the balance of the people that we see in trustee roles. We know that it's a big issue in the sector, that not only that there aren't enough women, there aren't enough disabled people, but there also aren't enough people from the global majority, and we should try and tackle all of that. So we did that, and we got lots of applications, and we successfully brought together, I think from memory, about 4 or 5 people. And so the idea was to give people a 1-year experience of coming to board meetings, coming to committee meetings, having full access to that experience, reading all the papers, but also meeting with me or the chair of the board or other colleagues before and after those meetings to kind of reflect and say, what was that like? Did it go how you expected? What did you notice? Is there stuff you don't understand? And just to try and grow people's confidence and understanding. We got a little bit sidetracked by COVID. We did have one face-to-face trustee meeting just before lockdown where we had a couple of shadow trustees in the room, but we really struggled to maintain the scheme during the first year of COVID, and it slightly fizzled away, if I'm honest. That's no one's fault but mine, but I learned a lot from it, and I think, like lots of things we do, we hope that they will be successful, but actually often things need a bit more resource, they need a bit more effort than we might have available. And so I hope to do something similar again at Sense eventually. It's not a plan to do currently, but eventually. And if we do that, I want to try and make sure that there's a bit more time and energy available to support the people who are on the scheme. I don't think we did it perfectly, but I definitely learned a lot of lessons. But I think it's really important for people to have the opportunity to be in the room and to see what does being in a trustee meeting look like? How does it feel? Is it really boring? Is it interesting? And sometimes you can't get in the room unless you've been in the room before, and that's terrible. So I'm really interested in like how you open those doors in lots of different ways. And lots of other people doing exciting stuff. You know, there's lots of focus in the sector on young trusteeship, there's some great Twitter accounts, if anyone's still on Twitter, supporting improving the number of queer trustees, black trustees. You know, there are ways to diversify trusteeship out there. I'm very passionate about us having very diverse boards.
I agree with you totally. And it's interesting you've said that, because the concept of the scheme was there and great. And the concept can be re-established. But when you went through restructuring and changes within Sign Health, you used restructuring not only just operationally and strategically, but at the governance level as well. So you managed to restructure, bring in deaf trustees, and that then filtered out across other deaf organisations. And it's funny how we view this. For example, my organisation, Action Deafness, we had kind of 3-4 trustees from the Sign Health board. You know, they'd finished their term with Sign Health and then moved on to us. I'm just talking about how they've learnt to become trustees through governance and training and leadership. And it's very obvious. It was groundbreaking back then. And now other deaf organisations are starting to use that, you know, particularly under the EDI model, equality and diversity and inclusion. It really is crucial, especially at governance level. So I've seen you do something similar at VODOG, the voluntary organisations of disability groups, you know, and you're pushing for EDI policies within that group as well.
Yes, I've just stood down from the VODG board because I spent 6 years, the maximum number of years on the board. I'm quite sad because I really love the organisation. VODG is the kind of umbrella charity for social care providers. So a number of charities, including Action Deafness and Sense and Sign Health, are members of VODG. It's a great organisation. We're still members, so I still get to see the charity work. But I think, you know, the statistics, the evidence tells us that most charity boards, not all of them, but most charity boards are still dominated by people who are white, male, older, non-disabled, cisgender, straight. And I'm not knocking people who fulfill those criteria. Obviously, we all know lots of great people who can be described in that way. It's about difference, and it's about having a conversation. As a chief exec, I want to have a conversation with the board who will be interested in what we're talking about, but also have different points of view. And that there's that fantastic thing that happens. I remember a conversation in a board meeting at Sign Health where 2 deaf trustees were disagreeing with one another about what the deaf people's experience might be of something, because they had different experience. That's exactly what you want, right? It's quite hard to create that. It's harder than it can look. It's easy to be critical of boards, but you can't always see the work that goes on behind. So I want to try and kind of celebrate positively the progress that's being made in the sector and just encourage more of it. Yeah, it's easy to be critical, but there's definitely stuff we can do.
You've described that perfectly. And obviously, through your leadership journey, you've spent time not only utilizing your leadership skills and credentials, but also trying to create something, to create leadership from within. So what you described about Vodog, about Sign Health, and about other organizations. You mentioned earlier that you were on the board of NCVO, the National Council of Voluntary Organisations. And I smiled when you said that, because I was thinking, oh, what's next? What board are you going to be next? What makes you excited about a board position? What's your ambition? What are you going to make happen within NCVO? I hope you don't mind sharing that with us.
I love NCVO. I think it's a really important charity. It has a very big membership. Tens of thousands of charities are members of NCVO. And it has a really rich history. For a very long time, it's supported charities that are very, very small and very, very big and everything in between. And I think NCVO played a very important role during COVID, during the last 5 years. Um, uh, I'm really proud of Sarah and Priya, who lead NCVO. I think they're doing a really fantastic job. I think they have a really contemporary approach to leadership that feels like it's 2025. And yeah, I suppose I'm drawn to it because I'm proud of what they're doing, and it feels like an important organisation. And there's an opportunity for us to do more for the charity sector as it progresses, as it changes. There's lots of exciting things happening in the charity sector. Obviously, we have a new government, and that means new ministers who are responsible for charities. But we also have new leadership at the Charity Commission. So it is a time of change, and I suppose I want to try and contribute to that. But also, selfishly, this wasn't the reason I applied, but it's one of the benefits. I have turned up at those trustee meetings, and two of my fellow trustees, Chris, who is Chief Exec of the NSPCC now, just recently joined, and Ruth, who is Chief Exec of the Duke of Edinburgh's Award. The three of us worked together at Scope 15 years ago. And it's just really wonderful to be in the same room as them again. I think they're very talented people who I learned a lot from back then. And to get the chance to work together in a different way is really lovely. So yeah, that wasn't why I applied for the role, but it's one of the many benefits.
The leadership journey, it's also about building networks, and having relationships. And that really is key. What you said about NCVO and, key people, that it's important to have those connections, and then for them to see you as well, that's an integral part of their networking. So it does work both ways, through Vodog with you and through others networks, again, where you've been present. We've had that exchange. So you're in Sense now. You've got new challenges. You're making a kind of fresh start. Can you kind of share with us what excites you about your future work with Sense?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. I'm really proud to be working at Sense. I feel very lucky to have got the job and to have come after Richard, the previous chief exec, who did such a wonderful job while he was here. Sense is quite a big organisation, and we do a lot of different things. We work in lots of other countries, not only in the UK, but also internationally. And there's a very rich history. So this year is our 70th anniversary at Sense. We were founded by two women, Margaret and Peggy, and their deaf-blind children, Christopher and Bunty. So four people set the charity up to help us grow support for, back then, for deaf-blind people. And now we support disabled people with complex needs, and that's sort of our focus. But I think there's a big opportunity for us to be clear about what we do next. So we're just beginning a piece of work on strategy, actually, at Sense. And I'm really keen to hear what other people think. So anybody who's watching today and who has a point of view about what Sense should be doing, please let me know. You can contact me in lots of ways on LinkedIn and Twitter and however you like. But we're really keen to listen to what other people think we should be doing and what they think our focus should be, so that we can make some decisions with lots of people. Obviously, the board ultimately make those decisions, but yeah, over the course of this summer, we're doing a piece of work on the future for Sense. So I suppose to answer your question, Craig, perhaps typically for me, the answer of what the future of Sense is isn't up to me. It's up to all of us. It's a team. It's I sometimes talk about it's a bit like a gazebo. I talk about this a lot of the time. I don't want to build organisations that feel like they have really thick walls that you can't get into, or they don't have doors or windows. So I prefer to think of things a bit like a gazebo. So it gives you some shelter from the rain or from the sun, and it's a place to gather, but you can come in and out wherever you like. So I suppose the work we're doing on strategy is a bit like that. At Sense, hopefully we can welcome people into the conversation, but you can come and go as you like, and there's no kind of, barrier to entry. I think the more that we all behave like that in our organisations, the easier it will be for us to work together. You're a great example, Craig, of somebody who's led a lot of work in coalition. I think this is a great example of that, where you bring people from all over the world to share their stories, and you've been doing that for a long time. But the work you lead on the BSL Advisory Board is another example of that. The work you did at UK Council on Deafness is another example of that. I'm really just copying you, Craig. I think leading by involving people is really important.
It's an interview. We're interviewing you, not me. But thank you. I think basically what you've said it's such a vital message, because when you talk about the gazebo, it is about bringing people together, and about being transparent. You use your leadership credentials to make that sort of thing happen. Yeah, and people can see that. I can see that in you. And of course, sometimes, there are leaders out there who kind of look at themselves and they, they feel it as a difficulty, a challenge, whether it's positive or negative, you're still learning from that. And that's where being a leader, I think leader is a strange title anyway. So actually, personally, do you call yourself a leader, or what term do you prefer?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I talk quite a lot about the role of a chief executive, and it's interesting in that job title. The way I understand that is that the executive bit, it means doer, and the chief means the lead doer. So in our world, in the charity world, we're being given a job to do by a board. The board run the charity. It's their charity. They're legally responsible for the charity, but they can't run it every day because it's too big and they're volunteers. So they employ a chief doer, me, to help them run their charity. And then I employ lots of people to help me do that too, and particularly in Sense where there are thousands of staff. But it's not mine. It doesn't belong to me. It's the board's. I'm not on the board. So I find that a really helpful construct to keep returning to keep clarifying with people so we've all got the same expectations. I'm a channel backwards and forwards between the board and the staff. And of course, that's an important role to play, but it means that I have a very particular set of responsibilities. Ironically, despite being called the chief doer, it means that I actually don't do very much because I ask other people to do things. So in many ways, our roles as chief executives are relatively administrative, because what we're doing is we're taking information from one place and giving it to somebody else and bringing it in. So actually, as deaf people, perhaps we have a unique perspective on the interchange of information. on the importance of communication, on the impact that we have on people's body language when we tell them things or ask them things. I think there is something in the deaf experience of that that is different and valuable. Yeah, being deaf is great, right? It's a positive thing, and it definitely can be positive in leadership.
Uh, you've summarised beautifully that part. I did want to ask you another question, but I think that's a great summary. I think you're right. In the line of work you serve the board, but the word serve, you're not leading for, you're leading to, and I think that makes a difference. Yeah, and your personal and professional life, obviously there's different perspectives that are held, based on experience. It's not like, personal is natural and we need to make something happen. It all comes combined, it's all encompassing in your leadership, for a specific reason. So what you've said, your vision as a CEO, is a fantastic example. Thank you for sharing that with us. Right, two things. I am mindful of the time. And of course, you've talked about your interests, your motivation for the future with sense. That's great. The government at the moment are making changes, especially welfare reform. And of course, that is going to affect the charitable sector and organisations. In your case with sense, how are you expecting sense to be impacted, and what's your role going to be? I don't want to say another COVID, but sense is a different sector, but what would be your motivations to start the ball rolling? What are you going to be doing at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There are a lot of things happening at the moment with the government. So we had the Green Paper last week, and there is the Spring Statement today, probably happening right now, which I think will have some more bad news for us as disabled people in it, sadly. So we're responding to that very strongly as a sense, and we're part of a coalition consortium of disability charities that gets to talk to the minister a little bit about that too. So try and make good use of those relationships. But I'm interested in also kind of challenging the basis of the question a lot. I worry that we are missing an opportunity as disabled people to remind everybody about what disability means. I learned from other disabled people, particularly Tara Flood, who taught me a lot about disability rights when I worked at Scope, who's an amazing disability rights activist. If you don't know Tara Flood, please look her up. She's incredible. I learned from her about the value of the social model of disability, and to remember that we are all different people with hearing loss, deaf gain, however you might want to describe it. I'm not denying the fact of that, but we're clear, aren't we, that we are disabled by society. We're clear, I think, particularly in this room, because of our experience of working with other deaf people, that there can easily be parts of our life where we are not disabled. We continue to be deaf, but we create opportunities where we're not disabled anymore. I long for the government to talk more in our language as disabled people about the barriers we face that disable us, because there's nothing wrong with us. It's the world that we have all created together that we can change, and that can improve opportunities, including opportunities to be employed. I think that's something the government's very interested in at the moment. We can't achieve that for disabled people unless we understand how the world disables people and barriers them from being employed. So I want to kind of shift I doubt I'll be successful, but I want to kind of shift the whole basis and foundation of the conversation. Because if we understood it through the social model lens, I think it would be really different.
Yeah, again, a great summary. And, you know, the social model point that you make, that is often sidelined. And I think it needs to come back onto the agenda. I think the green paper is going to prove to be a challenge. But as you said earlier, together we're stronger. So Sense and other organisations really need to rally together. Yeah, I mean, I think we could talk forever on this subject. We really could. But thank you for sharing that. I think we are tight on time. We have got some questions coming through. So maybe if I feed those to you quickly. So the first question, how do you have the time to be involved as a trustee on top of your day job? You know, are your employers flexible with that and supportive?
They are, and I've learned to be really clear about what I'd like to do in terms of volunteering or having other roles, and it's surprising how open employers will be to that. So I encourage people to ask those things. But also, I work with really talented people, so I don't need to be in every meeting, or I don't need to do everything. You know, that's not what being successful in my role would be. I think I need to trust the people that I work with for them to do a great job. I don't need to be here every minute. Well, I can't be here every minute of every day. We've got to sleep, right? So what happens when we're all asleep? The organisations continue. And in a sense, as would be the case in many other charities, we're still delivering services at night. We're a 24-hour business. So it's a mistake to think that you're so important that you couldn't possibly be here for a day. Of course you can, that's all right. It's just about working with teams of very talented people, which I'm lucky to do here at Sense.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. Another question we had just, I don't think we're going to have time for them all, but there is one other question I wanted to ask is, so when previously, when you were CEO, there were no qualifications needed. Is it right now that you need to go on a course to become a CEO? Interesting question.
I don't think you need to go on a course to be well, I hope not, because I haven't been on it. I've got a degree in drama. I think I'm interested in leadership, whether you're a CEO or not. I think lots of people can be leaders. I don't think that's necessarily about seniority. I think I'm really interested in leadership, and I definitely believe that it's good to study leadership, and I try to do that. I'll try and always do that. I don't think you kind of graduate as a leader. I think you keep learning. That's important. But no, I don't. I think you can learn lots of interesting things about being a chief exec, but I don't think there should be well, it's potentially a disabling barrier, isn't it? Because we know that there are lots of people who struggle to gain educational qualifications. So if we put that kind of barrier in place, we're probably going to disable people, which is not a good thing. So yeah, I think it's about leadership, really.
Thank you. Interesting. There is another question come in that is connected. Would you set up a leadership course for deaf younger people of the younger generation to allow people to become CEOs or trustees or have other prominent roles? Because lots of young people are kind of using technology now, aren't really interested in organizations or companies. So how can we develop that? And also maybe a leadership course.
Well, I'm aware that there is something in deaf history, FYD, which many colleagues will remember, and many deaf people talk to me about. It had a very big impact in its time. I'm not the expert on FYD, but I think we're right. There is something needed, probably for the next generation of leaders, and I suppose It's up to Craig, Lucy, the new chief exec at Sign Health, is doing an amazing job. It's up to all of us, all of you, to think about what's the future and how do we support young deaf people to learn those skills. But it feels like that had a big impact previously, so we should probably be trying to do something similar again.
Absolutely. Yeah. Unfortunately, now I think we are out of time, but one last question for you. So this summit is about inspiring deaf or hearing individuals who are keen to become leaders or be involved in leadership. What would be the message that you want to send out to them, you know, to aspiring leaders?
I would encourage people. I think as deaf people, we're often already leaders, more so than our hearing or non-disabled peers. Think about the time you might spend organising access to interpreters, working with interpreters in rooms, or other communication support. I think we're already gained skills in working with colleagues to achieve an outcome together. I think as deaf people, we have a lot to offer, and not just of deaf organisations, although deaf organisations need deaf leaders too. Yeah, I think I would encourage people to step into leadership roles and to try and ask for help. That's my top leadership tip, which is because I do it all the time. Ask for help.
Brilliant. Summed up beautifully, James. Fantastic. Thank you to the audience for the questions they've posed. I'm sorry we've run out of time. James, I know you are incredibly busy, but thank you for the time you've taken today to be part of the interview and for sharing your story and your leadership journey with us. It has been fantastic. Thank you so much, James. And I wish you all the best in the next steps of your leadership journey that you're taking. So just to summarize you, you are a change maker. You really are. And I think you need to accept that. And what I've taken from you is that you always put others before yourself. I think that's another remarkable summary of your leadership credentials. So thank you so much, James. So we're going to finish now this summit. There is another one on the 7th of May at 1 o'clock, and the next guest is Nadia Nadajara. She's a professional actress, and she will be interviewed by Stuart Harrison from Deaf Hearing Trailblazers. So don't miss out on that one. Okay. So again, thank you, James. It's been fantastic to have you as a guest. It's been an honour.